All right, Jabosai, good morning. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Av, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in honor of their grandchildren, Tikva Esther, Simcha, Avigayil, Milana and Milicenta. May they grow to become the best version of themselves. The Daf Yomi share in the refuah Shlema for Yehuda Ben Michal. May he, together with Kol Yisrael, experience a complete and enduring refuah. Our week of learning sponsors Binyomin Fleischman in memory of his father Shmuel Yudel Ben Binyomin Yaakov Zichron Livrach. We open the merit of our TALMUD Torah. The Neshama will have an aliyah and the family in Nechama. And Selma Woolf with immense gratitude to Hashem for the complete refuah of her granddaughter, Dr. Kari Davis. May she have a continued refuah together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. So with that, let us begin the beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Mem Zayin 47. We are going to pick up Emir Hashem on the last two lines of Mem Vav on the days 46b, where the Gemara says as follows. Remember, again, we're going through the different pieces stated in the Mishnah, really very interesting sugyas ahead of us in the days to come. So the Gemara said two lines up from the bottom, Shtar Ubiyah. So remember, again, the Mishnah explained to us that in Av, a father is entitled ultimately again to the Kesef Kiddushin, to Kesef and to Biyah with the Kiddushin of his daughter. So what does this mean? The Gemara says, well, obviously what it means is, in Kesef I understand, if the father betrothed his daughter, so Lamaisi he gets the Kesef. Shtar, he goes ahead and receives the shtar on her behalf. Biyah, he has the ability to give her over in marriage to another man. So the Gemara says, Minal, and from where do we know this? Amar Kra, the pasuk says, V'haisa li'ish acher. The pasuk says, she will be to another man. Iskish havios lahadadi. So we already know this from, we haven't gotten to it yet, but from last cycle, we know from our Kiddushin days, that one of the interesting drashas that we have from Kiddushin is that there is a connection between all three mechanisms of Kiddushin. Kiddushin could be affected in three different ways: Kesef, Shtar, and Biyah, and there is a strong connection between those three ways. So once we know that a father is entitled to go ahead and receive the Kesef Kiddushin from his daughter, so Lamaisa therefore is able to receive the Shtar and also able to give her over in Biyah. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Zakai b'mitziasa, he is entitled to her findings. So where do we know this? So we'll say, what's the pshat? So again, on a basic level, this means that his daughter, if she goes ahead and she finds something, the item that she finds belongs to the father. So the Gemara says as follows. Why is this? Top of Mem Zayin Mishum Eva. We will say this is to prevent animosity. What's the animosity here? Take a look at Rashi. Now, it is actually interesting. It's always interesting sometimes the printing errors that occurred in Rashi over time. Because if you read this, it says, since a father is not chayiv in mizonos. So I will say, if you look at the Hagos V'tziyunim, I think almost everybody has this in the Gemara, right? The Hagos V'tziyunim, the little footnote, Dalid, he says, Higia di'ihu. It's not de'eno, it's di'ihu. The Chevan di'ihu chayiv. It's not the father's not, bless you. The father's not chayiv, it's because the father is chayiv. Such an important, one, literally again, it's a letter. It's a letter. It's a nun versus a hey. It's fascinating. Since the father is chayiv to provide for the mazonos of his daughter, if she were able to go ahead and keep that which she finds, ika eva. There's going to be animosity. In other words, what's interesting about this is as follows. The assumption is like this: if a father is going to have to go ahead and support his daughter, so then halacha lamaisa again. When she finds something, that she go to the house, she go to the father, because at least if she finds something, it helps to offset the cost of her support. But if he has to support her, plus she gets to keep whatever it is that she earns, then the Lamaisa, that could cause some level of animosity. So interestingly enough, what's going to happen with the animosity? Below Zayin Lasu. What we're concerned about is, so we'll say when you see a concern about animosity, you say, okay, ill will. It's not just ill will, it's the concern that ill will lead the father to cease to support his daughter. Therefore, again, Chazal instituted that halacha l'maisa, the father gets to keep the father gets to keep whatever it is that she finds. Okay, so the Gemara goes right to furthermore, again, the father gets her earnings. So we know. From where do we know this? How do I know that the earnings of a daughter go to her father? Because we'll say the pasuk talks about the ability over here of a father to sell his daughter as a maidservant. Just like a maidservant. So we'll say, so here's what's interesting. So we know that a father has the ability to sell his daughter. Now remember again, we'll say, the halachos that we're talking about over here really apply to a girl through na'aros. This is a little bit different over here because remember, when can a father sell his daughter? Up until she becomes a nara. After she becomes an nara, a father can no longer sell his daughter as an amo. But again, nevertheless, we're going to see how the drush is going to work. So the pasuk says that a man has the ability to sell his daughter as a maidservant. So therefore, again, ma'amo, ma'siyadel ravo, just like a maidservant, anything she earns belongs to the master. Avbas ma'siyadel la'aviha. So to a daughter, anything that she earns ultimately comes to her father. To which the Gemara says, like we just mentioned before, that's fine. Ve'ima hani mili kitano dematzi mazbilo. That's fine. That's fine. I appreciate the drasha, but based on that drasha, when should a father be entitled to his daughter's earnings? It's only when he's able to sell her as an amo. When is a father able to sell his daughter as an amo? Only when she's a kitana. Only when she's a kitana. But ultimately, again, about na'ara. Delo matzi mazvin maisiya deha didahava. But I will say, according to this logic, that a father's entitlement to his daughter's earnings is based on the fact that he could sell her as an amo. And we say just as an amo. Ultimately, again, the master keeps the earnings. So too, again, a father keeps her earnings. Great. So that applies as long as a father can sell his daughter as a nara. So that tells me, as an amma. That tells me that a father has a right to keep his daughter's earnings when? Up until through the time that she is a kitana. Through the time that she is a kitana. Once she reaches narus, father can no longer sell her as an amma, and therefore Allah should not be entitled to keep her earnings as well. To which the Gemara says, mistabra da'aviyah havu. No, it doesn't make sense. Even through Naros, ultimately, again, the father should be able to keep the earnings of his daughter. How so? So listen to this. So the Gemara says, if you say that the girl's earnings do not belong to her father, they both say this is such a fascinating argument. So the Gemara, watch this. So just to follow the progression here. So remember, what's our question? What's step one? Step one is the Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? A father is entitled to his daughter's earnings. Great. Gemara asks, how do I know that? Right? Gemara answers, Amo. The fact that a father could sell his daughter as a maidservant tells us that just as a maidservant's earnings are the property of her master, so too again, the daughter's earnings are the property of her father. Gemara says, great. Only problem is that only works through when? Katnos, right? Only when she's a ketana. When she becomes an Ari, you can no longer sell her as an Amma. To which the Gemara says, okay, pause that. Let me show you something else. The Gemara says, it's always interesting. The Gemara says, it has to be that a father is entitled to his daughter's earnings. It's an interesting argument. It has to be that he's entitled. How so? Because a father has the ability to marry off his daughter. Now I both say, how long does the father's right to marry off his daughter extend until? Bagros. Excellent, right? Up until she becomes a Bogeres, a father has the right. Now I watch this. The fact that a father has a right to go ahead and marry off his daughter indicates to us that he's entitled to her earnings. Otherwise, how would a father be able to go ahead and marry off his daughter? After all, I will say, when a father is marrying off his daughter, by definition, that must mean that what? He has the ability to stop her from working. In other words, he's going to schedule the wedding, he's going to schedule the makeup, the hairdresser, all this stuff. But one second, she's got a job. She's got a job. The fact that he can marry her off, indicates that he controls her earnings. Because if not, the mere act of marriage would ultimately, again, be mevatel her ability to earn money. And if those earnings were hers, then she should be able to ask for compensation from her father for lost wages. Pretty incredible. Rashi says, Over pakasa bitulasa. So it's such a fascinating argument. So the Gemara says, Parach Ravachai, Ema diyoiv l'schar pakasa. Okay, well, I can answer that by saying, maybe you're right. Maybe if a father marries off his Nara daughter, and the Nara daughter has a job, and getting married causes her lost wages, maybe inachinami, the father is obligated to pay her lost wages. Maybe such a model like that exists. In other words, if the father doesn't take her working schedule into account and schedules everything, and she misses work and she loses wages, maybe inachinami, when the girl is a nara, the father is obligated to pay her those lost wages. Listen to this, it's fascinating. Inami, the other possibility is the masar la balayla. The other possibility is we're talking about a situation where the father marries off his daughter at night. So the assumption is, whatever her job is, she's not working at night. Right? She works during the day. Inami de masar la b'shabbasos v'yamim tovim. The other possibility is that maybe he marries her off on Shabbos and Yom Tiv when she wouldn't be working anyway. So what's that fascinating answer? So if you look at Tosas for just a moment, we're not going to do the whole thing, but Tosas in the wide lines, what do you mean he's marrying her off Shabbos and Yom Tiv? You're not allowed to get married Shabbos and Yom Tiv. Rashi says over here, Tosas. The Maslav Shabbos Yom Tovim. It's in the wide lines, about 5 lines in. Afagav Damar b'moed cotton v'samachta b'chagecha v'lo b'ishtecha. So we learn this Gemara. Pasuk says v'samachta b'chagecha. You shall rejoice in your Yom Tiv, and Chazal darshan on that. You should rejoice on Yom Tiv with Yom Tiv and not with your wife. And we'll say, of course, you should rejoice with your wife. What it means is that the Simcha of Yom Tiv should come from Yom Tiv itself and not from any other form of Simcha. So I will say, we learn from that, De'ein no sinashim b'chol shamoid, mishum de'ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. So I will say, so remember again, this is actually very interesting. So the idea of it, the Gemara says, I will say, why don't we get married on Shabbos and Yom Tiv? It's actually an interesting idea. Why don't we get married on Shabbos? If you think about it, Shabbos is going to be such a great time for chasanas. First of all, you significantly cut down on your guest list. Right? That's number one. You only have people who are walking distance, which is a fantastic money saver. No band, right? By the way, very little hot food selection also. Now, you know, we can have hot food. But I'm saying you would, what's the pshat? We'll say, so remember, you're not allowed to get married on Shabbos Yom Tov. That's a din d'Rabbanan. So the din d'Rabbanan is, it's a gzeira, it's fascinating. Gzeira mishum mekach u'memkar. It's a gzeira because of business dealings, because marriage involves kinyonim. And we don't make kinyonim on Shabbos because kinyonim are transactional. Anything that is transactional falls under the rabbinic ban of business-like practices. And why did Chazal ban business-like practices? Because they may lead you to ksiva, writing. So the malacha we're concerned about is writing. The din d'Rabbanan is therefore no business-like practices that can lead you to writing, and the outgrowth of that is any transaction. I will say, by the way, that's just in the sense, like, this is why if you give a gift, if let's say you're going somewhere on Shabbos, and you want to bring a gift to your host, so the truth is, giving someone something on Shabbos, and them to be kone it on Shabbos, is a problem. It's a problem. Ideally, what should be done is the gift should be given on Erev Shabbos. That way your host has the ability to acquire it on Shabbos, or before Shabbos, you give it to a third party to acquire it for your host. A third party could acquire it for your host. But again, it's amazing. Giving someone a simple bottle of wine on Shabbos, there are ways around it. But just to point out, it's not an ideal setup. Again, that's why we don't get married on Shabbos and Yom Tiv. So where does this come up? On Chalamayid. Because Chalamayid would be a great time to have a chasana. But why don't we get married on Chalamayid? That's v'samachta b'chagecha. Because you should rejoice on Yom Tov because of Yom Tov, Bechagecha v'lo be'ishtecha. So how could the Gemara say over here that the father will marry off his daughter on Shabbos Yom Tov? So we'll say, therefore, when the Gemara says Shabbos and Yom Tov, so we don't know what Shabbos means. Yom Tov, the Gemara is asking, it means Chalamayid. Chalamayid. So what's called? But you can't get married on Chalamayid. For Joshua Gemuri, ki da'amar bechagiga, ta'avim mid da'oraisa. They both say, by the way, this is actually pretty wild. If you think about this, the inability to get married on Shabbos and Yom Tov itself is really only what? D'Rabbanan. The ability to get married on Chalamayid is Da'oraisa. Fascinating. Right? Because again, the inability to get married on Shabbos and Yom Tov is because of Gzera Mekach Memkar, unless you come to Ksiva, D'Rabbanan. The Gzera on Chalamayid is V'samachta b'chagecha v'lo b'ishtecha Da'oraisa. Wild. To which the Gemara says, so Tosas is saying, but yet the Gemara says, the Gemara floats this idea that the father could either marry off his daughter at night, so she's not missing work, or Shabbos and she's not missing work. Says Tosas, what is Shabbos Yom Tov? I mean, this is incredible. He says, Dahalcha Airi Sha Achas Lifnei Yom Tov Shehu Ki Yom Tov Le'inyan Melacha Titosefes Da'oraisa Ubetela Ba'osa Shamina Melacha. Shabbos said the idea over here is something. So let's just go with this first answer. Tosas. Tosas says that when the Gemara says on Shabbos and Yom Tov, it means the little bit of time, the Tosefes Shabbos, Tosefes Yom Tov. There's a din to be Mosif Mikodesh Alachol. Ultimately, again, to add on to Shabbos and to Yom Tov. And that Tosefes, in many respects, has certain elements of Shabbos and Yom Tov itself. So what is the Gemara suggesting over here? The Gemara is suggesting that the father can marry off his daughter when? On the Tosefes, on the little bit of time before Shabbos, the little bit of time before Yom Tov, where B'Pashtos, she's not working. So okay, so just a fascinating Tosas. Tosas gives a second answer about giving her over to the Shluchei Ha'av, which we do here. If we finish off, he says, Inami kishamasra av l'shluchei habal, nisun below suda, afagav dar machol, it's nisun below suda, ika simcha lo chashiva simcha kuleh. Okay, so we'll go with the first answer of Tosas, that this idea is that maybe when the Gemara says Shabbos and Yom Tov, bless you, it's referring to Tosefes Shabbos, Tosefes Yom Tov, the time before Shabbos and Yom Tov. Okay, so the Gemara, go back to the Gemara. Elo, so let's go back. So therefore I will say, but here's what's interesting. So now, I understand that the drasha of from Yimkar Ish Es Bito La'ama helps me understand that a father would be entitled to his daughter's earnings while she is a ketana. What I'm missing right now is what? Ultimately, again, Nara. So the Gemara again is suggesting not a drasha but a logical argument. If a father has the right to marry off his Nara daughter, that means essentially he controls her schedule. So let's say, because if he didn't control her schedule, how would he be able to marry her off? After all, if she has a job, he's going to cause her lost wages. The fact that we're not concerned about lost wages indicates that he's entitled to her earnings. To which the Gemara says it's not a good argument. I'll tell you why. Possibility number one is maybe he has to pay her for lost earnings. That's possibility one. Possibility two, maybe he's limited to marrying her off at a time when what? She wouldn't lose earnings, such as when? Nighttime, or before Shabbos, before Yom Tov, to which the Gemara comes along and says, you're right. To which the Gemara says, Ella, kitana lo tzricha kra. Hashta zabuni mazbila, ma'asiya deha miboy. Shabbos says, so therefore, at the end of the day, let's take a step back. Kitana, we're all agreed, right? That halacha l'maisa, a father is entitled to his kitana daughter's earnings, right? How do I know this? Because if he could sell her as an amma, as a maid servant, he's certainly entitled to her earnings. So what about Nara? Ki itzrich kra lenara. So we'll say, when do I need the pasuk? The pasuk comes to teach me Nara. Because the answer doesn't seem to fully make sense. Of course it makes sense. I still don't understand it. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, ki itzrich kra lenara. It's an important piece of information. I will say, by the way, you think about, by the way, how Rashi learned Gemara. Right? Imagine being Rashi and learning Gemara without Rashi. In other words, it gives you just a new and profound appreciation for the gadlus of Rashi. Right? Rashi had to take these cryptic statements that we just would not understand, and he had to work it through to create this. It's incredible. So when they say that Rashi had Ruach HaKodesh, you begin to understand, because there are certain things that Rashi understood from the Gemara that it just doesn't appear one could really understand just based on their own intellectual acumen. Right? Even if you're an Oker Harim, and even if you're a Sinai, there's only so much you can understand from the words. Rashi HaKadosh, look at this statement. Kitzrich kra l'nara. Rashi says, V'avagav de'ikar kra b'ktanik ksiv. So we'll say, remember again, the pasuk we're focusing on over here is V'chi yimkar ish es bito li'amo. That's the pasuk. See, even though, again, that pasuk is talking about a kitana, mihu kra yiseirahu. In reality, I will say this entire pasuk is redundant. Why? Dichsiv li'amo, la'akushe bas la'amo, la'keisha dinara asya. See, I will say, the word li'amo, ultimately, again, is extraneous. You don't need it in this pasuk. You don't need it, because also remember again, the pasuk itself is talking about the context of the pasuk. In Parashas Mishpatim, is talking about avodim. It's talking about avodim. So the entire word li'amo is really unnecessary. The Gemara's understanding over here, why do you have the extra li'amo? To teach us halacha l'maisa that a father has an amma-like relationship with his daughter, not only in katnos, but in na'arus as well. Now, as a kitano, he has the ability to sell her as an amma. As a nara, he does not have the ability to sell her as an amma, but he does enjoy a certain amma-like relationship. In what way? The same way that the master gets the earnings of his amma, a father gets the earnings of his daughter, even through na'arus. So a fascinating drasha. So therefore, Rabbi, a father's entitlement to his daughter's earnings is all coming from the same pasuk. V'chiyimkar es bish, v'chiyimkar ish es bito li'amo. So that again, as a ketana teaches me, just as a father has a right to sell his daughter as an amma, and the master gets his amma's earnings, so to a father gets his ketana daughter's earnings as his ketana daughter's earnings. And as a nara, we darshan the extra word amma to teach us that halacha l'maisa, the father's relationship with his daughter is amma-like, even through na'aros. To teach us that although in na'aros he does not have the right to sell her, he does have the right to acquire her earnings. Incredible. Says the Gemara, Shabbos says an easy one. He has the ability to go ahead and annul her vows. We've seen this drasha 4 times in the last week already. Beis aviha, right? When she is in up through Na'arus, ultimately again she is in her father's home, which the Gemara already darshin the halacha l'maisa to speak about hafaras nedarim, that a father has the ability to annul or to revoke his daughter's vows. Umekabel gita, he has the ability to go ahead and acquire her get on her behalf. Both say, where do we know this? Minavan tichsev yatsa v'haisa. The pasuk says, literally again, she will leave a home and become someone's wife. Iskish, someone say, again, this pasuk is actually talking about, this is the pasuk by get. If a woman receives a get, v'yatsa mi beso, she will leave her husband's home, v'halcha, she'll go, v'aisali ishachar, she'll marry someone else. So we'll say, what this drasha does, we saw this, well, we haven't seen it yet, but we'll see we'll say, the Torah itself is equating Yitzia and Haviyah, Kiddushin and Gin. Kiddushin and Gin, to teach us what? That the same way that the father has the ability to receive her kesef Kiddushin, the father also has the ability to what? To receive the get on her behalf. Good. Well, this is an interesting one. So now at this point of the Mishnah, we switch a little bit. Because the first part of the Mishnah was talking about all of the entitlements that a father has in his daughter through Narus. And now ultimately, again, the Mishnah switches gears and talks about an entitlement a father does not have. What does he not have? We'll say, let's say the daughter acquires property. She acquires property. Now, how would she acquire property? So we'll say the simplest answer is she inherits her mother. Right? Her mother passes away. And there's certain property that came to the daughter that the father technically, again, does not have ownership in. So the Mishnah says the father does not get peiros. Now we'll say, what does peiros represent? Peiros can mean literal peiros. Like let's say she inherited an apple orchard, right? So he doesn't get to eat the apples. But peiros on a bigger level means what? Usage. He does not have the right of usage in property that is her own. A father does not have the right to go ahead and enjoy usage of property that belongs to his daughter while his daughter is alive. Now, what does he mean while his daughter is alive? Because if the daughter chas v'sholom predeceases the father, then we'll say what happens in a situation like that? The father inherits her. But while the daughter is alive, if there is property that is somehow solely owned by the daughter, the father does not have usage rights in that property. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ha'av ochel peiros b'chaye bito. Now, say here we come to a machlokes. So here we go. So the Rabbanon say like the Mishnah, that a father does not enjoy peiros in a property owned by his daughter. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, a father does enjoy peiros even in property owned by his daughter. Okay, but what's the machlokes? Here we go. Tanakama savar bishlam abal takinu the Rabbanan peri. So we'll say according to the Tanakama. So they say like this. Now remember, we'll say what does the Mishnah go on to say? In this respect, a father is different than a husband. Whereas a father will not enjoy peiros in property owned by his daughter, a husband does. Right? So if a wife owns property, husband has the right to enjoy peiros. So the Rabbanan will say like this. Because it makes sense that Chazal gave a husband peiros in his wife's property. Because if the husband doesn't have peiros, mimna v'lo parik. Also, we're going to see this later on, because we're concerned that if a husband does not have peiros in his wife's property, then what? If she's taken captive, he's not going to redeem her. There might be other shalom bias issues at play over here. And I'll say, again, I want to point out, I know I say this once in a while, but it's important to say it. I will say, the concept of marriage that we have, like of marrying for love or falling in love, these are newer concepts. Right? Marriage historically was a transaction. Right? It allowed for a woman for safety and security, for a man it allowed for children. But the notion of like feelings and love and mutual shared vision or aspirations, or we're going to grow together, build a life together, that wasn't bala inya. It's like, let's survive pogroms, right? If we survive pogroms, right, and are able to have children, and most of them don't die in infancy, and we have something to eat, it's a good life. It's a good life, right? So you have to understand, like the way we conceive marriage is it's panim chadashos ba'olakan. It's a totally new thing. So much of the way we see that Chazal structured marriage, I will say, is reflective of how. And by the way, this is not a Jewish thing. This was how the world looked at marriage. So I will say, so therefore, again, the Gemara says over here, according to the Rabbanon, Chazal had to give a husband peiros, because if he didn't give the husband peiros in the wife's property, there was a concern that if the wife was taken captive, the husband wouldn't redeem her. Ela'av, but a father, we'll say the relationship between a father and daughter is different than a relationship between a husband and wife. A father, Chazal didn't have to give him peiros in order for the father to redeem his daughter. Father's going to redeem his daughter regardless, even without the right to peiros. But a husband, Chazal felt that if he didn't have certain financial entitlements, would not be as motivated to go ahead and redeem his wife should she be taken captive. So we'll say that's the position of the Rabbanon. Therefore, the Rabbanon, as reflected in the Mishnah, holds that a father does not have peiros in his daughter's property. A husband does have peiros in his wife's property. What is Rabbi Yossi? Rabbi Yehuda Savar Av Nami Mimna Velo Parik. So I'll say a father. So Rabbi Yossi holds that no, a father, if he doesn't have peiros, will also, if his daughter's taken captive, a father may refrain from going ahead and redeeming his daughter. You'll say, how could that be? But say, actually, it's an interesting logic, because the father will say, Savar kisa nekita iluya tezel b'tifrok nafsha. The father will say, listen, she's got money. She has her own money. She has her own account. She has her own property. She has her own peiros. let her redeem herself from her property. In other words, it's not the father saying, I don't care about my daughter, right? But it's the father saying, Lemaisa, she has money. I haven't been able to use that money. Let her redeem herself from her own money. So we'll say, this is the fundamental machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanon. Everyone agrees that a husband gets peiros. And again, I will say, we're going to see this later on, but the logic for the husband receiving peiros is because we want the husband to redeem his wife in a situation where she's taken captive. Part of the way that we financially ensure that is by allowing him usage of the wife's property for the duration of the marriage. The shaila is, do we have to give the father the same right as the husband in order to ensure that he'll redeem his daughter? Rabbanan, absolutely not. The father is going to redeem his daughter regardless. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, absolutely yes. We have to go ahead and give the father. Rabbi Yossi, how do we paskin? We paskin. The Rambam paskins like the Rabbanan, and therefore again, a father does not have peiros in property solely owned by his daughter. Weiter. Niseis yasra lababal shu ochel. So we'll say, so now when they get married, ultimately again, husband gets rights in his wife's property. So we'll say this is fascinating. Tan Rabbanan. So here we go. Kasav la peiros ksus v'kelim she'avo ima mibeis aviyah lebeis baila. Mesa. We'll say here's a fascinating case. A father is writing what we call a nadin. Nadunya, dowry. Dowry. So he's sending his daughter, right? He's sending his daughter off to marriage, and he's sending her, kasavla, he's giving her peiros, ksus, kelim. Clothing, utensils, property, he's giving her. So we'll say, if you look at Rashi, kasav la peiros ksus kelim, pasak la av benedunaisa, shetachnis labayla, metaltalin, kigam peiros, tlushin, uksus, v'kelim, mekasva la mina erosin. So now the girl, we'll call her Rachel, is having erosin with Ruvain. Rachel's father writes her a very generous nadin, a very generous dowry. It's all metaltalin, Rashi points out over here. We'll talk about that later. It's right, all movable property. Now both say, now something interesting happens over here. Umesa. Rachel dies. Now, when does Rachel die? During Erusin. So Rachel and Reuven had Erusin, now Rachel dies. So what's going to be the Shaila? What's going to be the Shaila? Who gets the Nadin, right? Who gets the dowry? So the Gemara says, Mesa. Lo zacha b'dvar halalu. So we'll say, so Rabbanan Paskin, this does not become the property of the husband. Everything goes back to the father, assuming that it is the father who inherits his daughter. Everything goes back to the father. Okay, Mishum Rabbi Nassan Amru zacha b'dvar halalu. Rabbi Nassan says, no, the husband has acquired everything as of Erusin. Very interesting machlokas. So we'll say, what are the lema b'plukta? The Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah v'Rabbanan come after. We'll say perhaps the machlokas. We'll say again. So the Rabbanan say Rachel dies during Erusin. Property goes back to the father. Husband does not acquire it. Rabbi Nassan says no. Rachel dies during Erusin. Husband acquires everything. The Gemara says maybe this machlokas Rabbanan Rabbi Nassan is the same machlokas Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and the Rabbanan. What's the machlokas? Disnan nis armala oniskar shamin bein min hanisu min Erusin. Gova asakol. So I will say this is the flip case. Husband dies. Right? Rachel's married to Reuven. Right? Husband dies. So whether Rachel is widowed from Erusin or from Nisuin, Gova asakol. The Rabbanan say ultimately she collects her entire ksuva. But let's remember again, what does entire ksuva consist of? Iker and potentially Tosefes. Now, there doesn't have to be additional amounts, but there could be additional. Whatever it is. The entire ksuva is totally collectible upon her becoming a widow, whether she's widowed during Erusin or Nisuin. This is the position of the Rabbanon. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer, no. Mina Nisuin gova sakol. If she's widowed from Nisuin, ultimately she collects the entire ksuva. Or Mina Erusin, but if from Erusin, Besula gova masayim, va'amon amona. But from Erusin, ultimately, again, you only collect what? Iker ksuva. So if it's a first marriage, she's a basula, she'll get 200 zuz. Second marriage, 100 zuz. Shabbos say, see what's happening over here? Fundamental machlokes. A woman is widowed. We want to talk about what does she collect from her ksuva. Rabbanan hold, whether she's widowed from Erusin or from Nisuin, she collects the entire ksuva. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, depends when she's widowed. If she's widowed from Erusin, she gets Iker Ksuva. if she's widowed from Nisuin, she gets the entire ksuva. The entire ksuva. So says the Gemara, Shalo kasavla amanas lekonsa. Because ultimately, I will say, now what's Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's logic? His logic is a husband only means to commit himself to the entire ksuva, right? Only once what? There's Nisuin. Now I will say, go back to Rashi for just a moment, and Amud Aleph, just for a moment. Lema by Plukta. Look at that Rashi. Last Rashi Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. Demand Amar Baila Yoresh Nidunaisa Mina Eirus and Karaban. And Rashi just lays this out very nicely. The opinion who said that the husband acquires the dowry from Eirus, which we'll say was the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Of Rabbi Nasan. Kirabanan da Amri Imesu Goves Akal Mana Masayim Vitosefes. Alma ksuva kaima kilo nises imesa ihi nami yoris ihu nedunya shafi besoch ashtar nichtava dachi kasinala. So we'll say, just before we go into the Gemara, Rashi setting this up like this. So we now have two machloksim, right? So let's go back for just a moment and just set up the two machloksim. Machlokis number one is in terms of dowry. Father writes a generous dowry to his daughter. Daughter enters into Erusin. Daughter dies during Erusin. What happens with the nedunya? What happens with the dowry? So we've got the Rabbanon saying husband acquires nothing. Everything goes back to the father. Rabbi Nasan saying husband acquires everything. Machlokis number two. Couple gets married. Right couple gets married, husband dies. So ultimately again, Rabbanon, wife always gets entire ksuva, whether she's widowed from Erusin or from Nisuin. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says no. If she's widowed from Erusin, she'll get Iker Ksuva, but she only gets the full Ksuva if widowed from Nisuin. What the Gemara wants to suggest to Rabbi say is to align these two machloksim. So watch this. Here we go. Amud Beis. Leman da'amar lo zacha ki Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So we'll say the opinion who holds that the husband doesn't get the dowry, which was whose opinion? The Rabbanon. Right, so the opinion that says that the husband doesn't get the dowry, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he's going to be aligned with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar is interesting. Even though Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, right, why? Look at Rashi. Man damar lo zachak Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, damar lo kasav lo ksuva, ela amanas lo konsa. Now we'll say, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's logic is that when she is widowed from Erusin, all she gets is what? Iker ksuva. Why? Because the Tosefes, which is often more than the Iker, ultimately, again, he only has in mind if they really enter into Nisuin. So that's the same logic. When does a father have in mind to really convey the Nedunya to his daughter? When? Upon Nisuin. Right? Umando Amar Zacha, but the opinion ultimately, again, who holds that Allah Lamaisa, the husband acquires the dowry even when his wife dies during Erusin. Ultimately, again, Kirabanan. He'll hold like the Rabbanan, namely, that when the woman is widowed, whether from Erusin or from Nisuin, she collects the entire ksuva. That's how the Gemara wants to align the machlokes. To which the Gemara says, no. The Chuli Alma, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi said, we actually learned this sugi already. It's not true. The halacha follows Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, namely, that when a woman is widowed from Erusin, she'll collect Iker ksuva, and from Nisuin Tosefes. Rabbi said the truth is, we saw the Rambam. The only time you're really entitled to a ksuva from Erusin is when, remember we learned this last week, is when the husband explicitly commits himself. If there's no explicit commitment, the ksuva obligation only kicks in into by Nisuin. Right? There's no ksuva by Erusin unless someone explicitly committed themselves. But again, let's go with this over here for now. So really, Me'ikar Adin, we're going to pass in like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and therefore, at most, from Erusin, you're only entitled to Iker Ksuva, and Tosefes only comes in when? As of Nisuin. So watch this, here we go. Man da'amar lo zachak Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So both say, going back to the Nedunya case, the one who says that the husband is not entitled to the dowry when the wife dies during Erusin, i.e. the Rabbanon, that opinion is certainly aligned with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Because what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is really saying is the real commitments, financial commitments of marriage, really only begin as of when? Nisuin. Umanda Amar Zacha. But what do we do with the opinion who says that when the wife dies during Erusin, the husband gets to keep the dowry. What do we do with that opinion? This is fascinating. So we'll say that opinion, that's Rabbi Nosson. So Rabbi Nosson will say it's not a fair comparison. See, the case of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is talking about a husband's commitments to his wife. Husband's commitment to his wife. He will say there's a strong logic there that when a husband is committing himself to his wife, that clearly the commitment is predicated on what? On what? On what? Nisuin. He'll say, why is a man going to commit himself financially to his wife just in Erison? It only makes sense that the financial commitments of marriage, husband is only committing himself after Nisuin. That's logical. Watch this. But I also remember again, the case of the dowry is not commitments from husband to wife, but rather it's commitments where? From wife to husband. Or I should say from father of the bride to the husband. Watch this. Afilu Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah modi. Even Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would say that those commitments could start as an erison. Why? This is incredible. Timishum ichtunihu, vaha ichtani lahu. He will say, it's interesting that it could be that when it comes to financial commitments from a husband to a wife, it's clear that a husband never has in mind for those commitments to start any earlier than Nisuin. But when it comes from financial commitments from the bride to the groom, or from the bride selling to the groom, the simcha of the father of the bride is even when the marriage is initialized, right? Even when the marriage is first created, even though it's not yet completed, right? So as soon as there's irisin, there's a connection, there's a chasana, there's a familial bond that's created. And according to Rabbi Nosson says ultimately again that halacha l'maisa, that's enough to create a financial commitment from the bride's side to the groom's side. I will say it's interesting. There always is this little bit of like imbalance in marriage, right? That ultimately, again, you see it over here how it's clear the husband would never financially commit himself to his wife before Nisuin, but the Kalas family is so happy that their daughter is married, even though it's just Irisin, that they'd be willing to go ahead and commit themselves financially already. So let's say really quite fascinating. So this is the machlokas. So again, the halacha l'maisa by ksuva we know that really there's no ksuva until nisuin. We'll say, but what about this case? What about this case by the Nadunya? This is a fascinating case. So what do we do in this case over here? Father wrote a large Nadunya, ultimately again, a large dowry to his daughter. Right? Rachel does Erisin with Ruvain. What happens? Ruvain dies. Who gets to keep the dowry? So I will say, I need to share with you. I must. It's obligatory upon me to share with you this incredible Rambam. It's fascinating. Let's look at Rambam writes. This is in Hilchos Ishus, Parak Chaf Gimel, Halacha Yud Aleph. They'll say, listen how the Rambam does not give a clear halacha over here. Do you know why? He says, listen what he says. Minhagos Rabos Yesh B'Nedunya. The Rambam says there are many different ways that different communities handle Nedunya, handle dowry. Yesh Makamo Shinago Shichtavu Biksuvas. Biksuvas Hanadunya. So the Rambam simply goes on and on and on. And therefore he says, halacha l'maisa, when it comes to Nedunya, what do? You follow minag hamakom. Fascinating. So apparently, again, the way dowry was dealt with, and even the way dowry itself was recorded, and at what point in time the dowry became the property of the husband. Was it Erisin? Was it Nisuin? The Rambam says, minag hamakom. Many communities have their own practices. Follow your minag hamakom. Fascinating. Let's go back there. Says the Gemara, so remember again, a husband is obligated to go ahead and support his wife. So now we've transitioned in the Mishnah ultimately to a husband's obligation. So as Rabbi say, some really incredible sugyas ahead of us this week. Father is obligated to the mizonos of his wife. Tan Rabbanon, so it's fascinating. Tiknu mizonos tachos ma'aseh. So Rabbi say, Chazal went ahead and gave the wife, I should say, instituted the obligation of mizonos in reciprocity or like a quid pro quo for her earnings. So in other words, what's interesting about this, as you're going to see, is kind of like what came first over here. The way the Gemara is worded over here is what it sounds like is, since a husband gets his wife's earnings, Chazal went ahead and gave her mazonos. We're going to see, in fact, that's not really how it works. In other words, first, there's an obligation of mazonos. Husband is obligated to support his wife. But because a husband is obligated to support his wife, Chazal gave him the right to her earnings, which makes sense, because what's the idea over there? The idea is it helps to offset the expense of support. Ukvurasa tachas ksuvasa. And I will say ultimately again, the halacha l'maisa, Rashi points out over here, literally again it means he has an obligation to bury her because he's entitled to her ksuva. Now what does that mean? Look at Rashi. Tachas ksuvasa, tachas hamadunya shech nisalo, the ksuva b'shtara ksuva v'hu yoresh. Shabbosai, by the way, this is actually interesting because remember, nedunya, dowry, is written in the ksuva. It's written in the ksuva. And I will say, we don't do this today, but what I will tell you, what we do today is in the ksuva, after we write the amount of the ikra ksuva, we also go ahead and we speak about the property, dan halas lei mi be avuha. That's the lashon. Dan halas lei avuha, that she is bringing in from her father's home. So we'll say, bisman Gemara, even the passages on a Gemara, they wouldn't just write that line. Rather, what would they write? Right? V'dana dunya, that's what it is. V'dana dunya, dan halas lei mi be avuha. Then the dunya, the dowry she's bringing from her father's home. So we'll say, so in the Zana Gemara, they would say, v'dana dunya, see Appendix A, right? And we're going to itemize every single thing that the girl is bringing. By the way, not only itemizing, what else is attached? See Appendix B, right? For evaluation, right? For an appraisal of each, because remember again, husband is on the hook, well, depending on the nature of the nad, right? See Appendix B for the appraisal, that would all be there. Since a husband gets the right to use all of this property and potentially also inherits it, depending on the order of death, ultimately, again, therefore, he has an obligation to bury her. So the Gemara says, Leficha, Baal Ochal Peros. Therefore, a husband eats Peros. Greg gets usage. The Gemara says, Peros, who's talking about Peros over here? You're right. There's a piece missing from the Bryce over here. Here's how you have to read it. Tiknu mizonos tachas ma'aseyadeha. Chazal instituted mizonos because of ma'aseyadeha. Rabbi say, because he's obligated to support her, therefore he's entitled to her earnings. Upirkuna tachas peros. And about saying, a husband is obligated to redeem his wife if she's taken captive because he enjoys peros of her property. So about say, very interesting. So in other words, Chazal are linking each of these things. Since ultimately, again, he enjoys peros, therefore he's, or I should say, because he has an obligation to redeem her, therefore he's given rights to peros. Ukvurasa tachas ksuvasa. And ultimately, again, she enjoys the ksuva, which means the dowry property that she brings in, because he has the obligation to go ahead and bury her. Therefore, lefichach bal ochal peros. Again, why do you need the word lefichach? My lefichach. So, what would you have thought is fascinating? So, I would have thought that maybe we shouldn't let the husband eat the peros. In other words, he has a right to the peros, but what we should do is we should let the peros accrue. I will say, obviously, when we say let the peros accrue, it doesn't literally mean let a pile of fruit. What it means is, maybe we should kind of put the peros in escrow. Put in escrow. Why? Listen to this. The imkain, because we'll say, because the imkain mimna v'lo parek. Because maybe we're concerned, and therefore, what happens if you put the peros in escrow? What happens if you do that? If she's taken captive, it's good news. That's not good news, she's taken captive. I mean, if she's taken captive, what is the good news? There's money to redeem her because you have the money in escrow. You have the peros in escrow. It's fascinating. Kamash Malan, Daha Adifa. I will say, the Gemara says, no, actually it's better to let them enjoy the peros. Why? This is fascinating. Zimnin de lo malu, uparak le midide. Because we'll say, what's going to happen? Because what happens if the escrow fund is not enough to redeem her? So what could happen? The husband can say, well, sorry, we'll wait a little bit. It's okay. Hopefully the captors are nice, right? I'm sure the money's going to accrue a little bit more. Shouldn't only be another harvest or two, right? And what's going to happen? He's not going to redeem her. Masha'inkin, I will say, if he's constantly and consistently enjoying the peros, he'll recognize that the price, so to speak, for that benefit is the redemption of his wife, and therefore he will redeem her at whatever the cost. So the Gemara says, "Ve'epachana." In other words, we'll say, how do you know how to align which right with which entitlement? To which the Gemara says, "Rabbi, tiknu matzui lematzui v'she'ino matzui l'she'ino matzui." They went ahead and they instituted that which is common for that which is common, and that which is uncommon for that which is uncommon. Take a look at Rashi. Last two lines of Rashi. Mizonos u'maisi adem mitzuyim. See that both sides. The need to go ahead and support one's wife, and earnings are common. So therefore, again, the right, the entitlement to earnings goes with mizonos. They're both common. Shavuya, right? On the flip side, ultimately, again, being taken captive, and a woman having her own property are not as common. And therefore, Allah Lamaisa, they aligned those two rights with each other. We'll say, stop over here for today. Tomorrow we're going to get in, we'll say incredible sugyas, like yisolis, like sugyas out of us, speaking about the halachic rights and entitlements of marriage. Incredible week ahead. Shkoyach.